My name is Evelyn Brooks, and tonight I'm holding a letter I should have read 30 years ago. It's dated March 14th, 1970, written in blue ink on yellowed paper. The handwriting is shaky, not from age, but from fear. It belonged to a woman named Margaret Whitfield. She was 23 years old, a lighthouse keeper's daughter. And this is her last letter. No one knew why Margaret burned every photograph that night. But when the lighthouse went dark, the entire town realized something had ended forever. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret grew up in a lighthouse on the cliffs of Cape Sorrow, Maine. It wasn't a romantic place like you see in paintings. The wind was cold, the rocks were sharp, and the ocean never forgave mistakes. Her father, Thomas Whitfield, had been the lighthouse keeper for 22 years, a silent man. A man who spoke more to the sea than to his own daughter. But Margaret loved him. She loved the way he polished the lamp every evening, the way he stood at the edge of the cliff, watching ships pass in the fog. She thought he was protecting them. She had no idea what he was really doing. Margaret's mother died when she was 7, drowned in a boating accident. At least, that's what everyone said. But Margaret remembered something else. She remembered her mother's face that morning. Pale, terrified. She remembered her father's hands gripping her mother's wrists too tight. But she was a child, and children don't question their fathers. The lighthouse was Margaret's entire world. She learned to read by the light of the lamp. She learned to cook on the small iron stove in the keeper's quarters. She learned that the ocean had moods, calm some days, murderous others. And she learned that her father's silence wasn't peace. It was something heavier. Something that pressed down on the house like fog. Thomas Whitfield never remarried. He never hired help. It was just him and Margaret, alone on that cliff, for 16 years. The townspeople said he was devoted to his daughter, that he'd sacrificed everything to raise her after his wife died. Margaret believed that too, for a long time. She remembered the winters most clearly, the way the wind would scream through the cracks in the walls, the way the lamp had to stay lit no matter what, through blizzards, through storms that tore shingles off the roof and sent waves crashing over the rocks below. Her father would climb the tower stairs every 4 hours to check the lamp, to wind the mechanism, to make sure the light never went out. "Lives depend on this light," he told her once. She was 9 years old. "If we fail, people die." Margaret never forgot those words. She grew up believing her father was a guardian, a saint, a man who stood between the ships and the rocks, keeping watch while the world slept. She never imagined he was the one luring them to their deaths. But 20 years later, Margaret would find something that changed everything. The town of Cape Sorrow had 342 residents in 1970. Most of them fished for a living. Some worked at the cannery on the south end of town. A few ran shops. A general store, a post office, a diner that served coffee so strong it could wake the dead. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew to leave Thomas Whitfield alone. He came into town once a month for supplies. He never stayed long, never made small talk. He'd walk into Porter's general store, hand over his list, wait while it was filled, pay in cash, and leave. People nodded at him respectfully. Some of the older men would shake his hand. Margaret came with him sometimes. She was quiet, like her father. Pretty, in a sad sort of way. The kind of girl who looked like she was always apologizing for taking up space. She had no friends her own age, no life outside the lighthouse. The other girls in town had gone to dances, gotten married, started families. Margaret had the lamp and the fog and the endless sound of waves. Until February 1970. That's when Daniel Cross arrived. In February 1970, a stranger arrived in Cape Sorrow. His name was Daniel Cross. He said he was a maritime historian, researching old lighthouses along the New England coast. He had dark eyes and a quiet smile. And when he looked at Margaret, she felt seen for the first time in her life. They met at the town library. She was returning a book, Wuthering Heights, her favorite. He was studying old shipping logs. The library was a small building next to the post office. 2 rooms, floor-to-ceiling shelves, and a librarian named Mrs. Castellano, who had been there since 1943. Margaret came every 2 weeks to exchange books. It was her only escape from the lighthouse, her only window into lives that didn't smell like kerosene and salt. That day, she was returning Wuthering Heights for the 3rd time. She'd read it so many times she'd memorized whole passages. She loved Heathcliff's darkness, his rage, the way he loved Catherine so much it destroyed him. She didn't realize she was looking for her own destruction. Daniel was sitting at the corner table, surrounded by maps and old newspapers. He had a notebook open in front of him, and he was writing something in careful, precise handwriting. He looked up when Margaret walked in. Their eyes met, and something shifted. "Do you live near the lighthouse?" he asked. "I am the lighthouse," she answered. He laughed, and something inside her cracked open. They talked for 2 hours that first day, about the lighthouse, about the ships that passed in the night, about what it was like to grow up in a place where the ocean was always watching. Daniel told her he was from Philadelphia, that he'd been studying lighthouses for 5 years, traveling up and down the coast, documenting their histories before they were all automated and forgotten. He said there was something noble about lighthouses, something pure. Margaret almost told him the truth right then, that there was nothing pure about her lighthouse, that it was built on rock and lies, and her mother's bones. But she didn't, because she didn't know yet. Not really. They started meeting in secret, not because it was forbidden, but because Margaret had learned to keep everything inside. Daniel told her about the world beyond Cape Sorrow, cities with lights that never went out, music that made you forget your name, a life where the ocean didn't own you. And Margaret told him about the lamp, about the fog, about her father's silence, but she didn't tell him about the ships, because Margaret didn't know yet. Not about the 14 ships, not about the bodies, not about what her father had been doing all those years. Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret and Daniel met 6 times, always at the library, always in the afternoon, when her father was busy with maintenance work on the lighthouse grounds. Daniel brought her things from the outside world, a record, Joan Baez singing about diamonds and rust, a postcard from New York City, showing buildings so tall they scraped the sky, a newspaper article about the moon landing, about men walking on a surface no human had ever touched. "You could leave, you know," Daniel said one afternoon. They were sitting by the window, watching snow fall over the harbor. "Cape Sorrow isn't the only place in the world. It's the only place I know," Margaret said quietly. "Then learn a new place." She looked at him. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I owe him," she wanted to say. "Because he raised me alone. Because he's my father, and I'm all he has. Because I'm afraid." But she didn't say any of that. She just smiled and changed the subject. Daniel didn't push. That's what she liked about him. He let her keep her secrets. He didn't pry into the sadness that clung to her like fog. On their 6th meeting, Daniel gave her a book, The Awakening by Kate Chopin. It was a slim volume with a blue cover, worn at the edges. "It's about a woman who realizes she's been asleep her whole life," he said. "And, when she wakes up, everything changes." Margaret took the book home. She read it that night, by lamplight, while her father slept in the room below. She read about Edna Pontellier, about her slow awakening to herself, about the way she learned to want things, art, passion, freedom, about the way the world punished her for it. And when she reached the end, when Edna walked into the ocean and didn't come back, Margaret closed the book and cried for the first time since her mother died, because she understood. Some women aren't allowed to wake up. That's when everything changed. It was March 10th, 1970, 4 days before the letter. Margaret's father went to the mainland for supplies. He would be gone for 2 days. And for the first time in her life, Margaret was alone in the lighthouse. Thomas left early in the morning, before dawn. He took the boat across the bay to Rockland, where the larger stores were. He did this 4 times a year. Margaret usually went with him, but this time he told her to stay. "Someone needs to watch the light," he said. Margaret nodded. She helped him load supplies into the boat and watched him row out into the gray water, watched the boat disappear into the morning fog. And then she was alone. The lighthouse felt different without her father. Bigger, emptier, like a church after the congregation had gone home. Margaret made herself breakfast, oatmeal and black coffee. She checked the lamp, even though it had been extinguished hours ago. She swept the floors. She washed the windows. She did all the small, mindless tasks that filled her days. But by noon, she'd run out of things to do. She stood in the kitchen, looking around, feeling restless in a way she couldn't name. And that's when she thought of her father's office. She decided to clean his office, a small room at the base of the tower, filled with maps and compasses, and things she'd never touched. She wasn't snooping. She was just trying to be helpful. The office was off limits. Always had been. "Keeper's business," her father said whenever she asked about it. But he wasn't here. And Margaret thought, just this once, she could tidy it up, dust the shelves, organize the papers. A surprise for when he came home. She opened the door. The room smelled like old paper and tobacco smoke. There was a desk against the wall, covered in maps, a filing cabinet in the corner, shelves lined with logbooks dating back decades. Margaret started with the desk. She sorted papers into neat piles. She wiped down the surface. She organized the pens and pencils in a chipped ceramic cup. Then she moved to the floor. That's when she noticed it. A loose floorboard beneath the filing cabinet. It wasn't obvious. Just a slight gap. A little too much give when she stepped on it. Margaret knelt down. She pried at the edge with her fingernails. The board came up easily, like it had been removed many times before. Underneath was a space. And in that space was a leather-bound journal. That's when she found the logbook. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard. A leather-bound journal, thick with years of entries. Margaret opened it, expecting to find weather notes, ship sightings, routine reports. Instead, she found this. November 3rd, 1954, SS Margaret Ann. Light extinguished 11:47 p.m. Ship lost, 9 souls. April 17th, 1958, trawler Caroline. Light extinguished 2:13 a.m. Ship lost, 4 souls. September 22nd, 1963, freighter Northern Star. Light extinguished 10:30 p.m. Ship lost, 11 souls. Page after page. 14 ships, 63 people. And next to each entry, in her father's handwriting, payment received. Margaret's hands started shaking. She read it again and again, trying to make it mean something else, anything else, but there was no other meaning. Her father had been turning off the lighthouse light, on purpose, in storms, in fog, and ships crashed on the rocks below, and someone paid him for it. The entries were meticulous. Each one included the date, the time, the name of the ship, the weather conditions, and the number of souls lost. And next to each one, an amount, $300, $500. Once, for a large freighter, $2,000. Margaret flipped through the pages, her breath coming faster. The earliest entry was from 1948. The most recent was from January 1970, 2 months ago. 22 years, 14 ships, 63 people. Insurance companies, she would later learn. Rival shipping firms. People who wanted certain captains dead. Her father didn't ask questions. He just took the money and watched the ships go down. And Margaret had slept through it all, night after night, year after year, while men drowned, screaming in the dark. The first ship on the list was called the SS Margaret Ann. Her mother's name was Margaret Ann. Margaret stared at the entry. November 3rd, 1954. She would have been 2 years old. Her mother would have been alive. The entry was longer than the others. There was a note in the margin. M.A. found the first logbook, threatened to report, had to be done, made it look like accident. $500 for the boat. M.A. Margaret Ann. Her mother. Her father had killed her. Mother. Margaret couldn't breathe. The room tilted. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. Everything she'd believed about her father, about her life, was a lie. Margaret sat on the floor of that office for 6 hours. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, holding the logbook, as the sun set and the lighthouse lamp began to turn. And she thought about her mother, who had argued with her father the night before she died. Margaret remembered now. She remembered her mother saying, "You can't keep doing this, Thomas. It's murder." And the next morning, her mother was gone. Margaret closed the logbook. She put it back under the floorboard, and she walked upstairs to her room, where she sat by the window and watched the beam of light sweep across the black water. She thought about Daniel, about the life he'd described, the world beyond this place. But she couldn't leave. Not yet, because her father would be home in 2 days. And Margaret had a choice to make. Wait, don't miss this detail. When her father returned on March 12th, Margaret was waiting for him at the dock. She helped him carry the supplies up the cliff path, just like always. She made dinner, just like always. And when he sat down to eat, she asked him a question she'd never asked before. "Did you love her?" Her father looked up. "Who?" "Mama." He didn't answer right away. He just stared at his plate, his jaw working slowly. Finally, he said, "I did what I had to do." Margaret nodded. She stood up. She cleared the dishes, and she went to bed. But she didn't sleep. At midnight, she heard her father climbing the tower stairs, going to check the lamp, like he did every night. She waited until she heard the door at the top close. Then she went to his office. She took the logbook, and she walked to the town constable's house, 3 miles down the coast road, in the freezing rain. She knocked on the door at 1:30 in the morning. When Constable Porter opened it, Margaret handed him the logbook and said 6 words. "My father is a murderer. Arrest him." But the most shocking part was yet to come. Constable Porter took the logbook. He opened it. He read the first page, the second, the third. Then he closed it. He handed it back to Margaret. And he said, "Go home, girl." Margaret stared at him. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you." "Then why?" "Because half the men in this town took money from those ships going down, including me." The rain pounded against the porch roof. Margaret couldn't breathe. "Your father kept us all fed during the Depression," Porter continued. "Kept the town alive. You think anyone's going to thank you for dragging that up now? 63 people died, and 600 people in Cape Sorrow survived." Porter's face was stone. "Go home, Margaret. Burn that book, and don't ever speak of this again." He closed the door. Margaret stood there in the rain for a long time. Then she walked back to the lighthouse. She didn't go inside. She sat on the rocks and watched the beam of light turn, turn, turn. And she thought about what it means to be complicit, to benefit from murder without knowing, to sleep in a warm bed while men drowned in the cold. She thought about her mother, about how alone she must have felt, knowing the truth, trying to stop it, and paying the price. Margaret thought about Daniel, about running away with him, starting over, pretending none of this had ever happened. But she knew she couldn't, because if she did nothing, her father would keep doing it, and more people would die, and Margaret would become what her father had always been, a coward. What you've heard so far is only the beginning. On March 14th, 1970, Margaret Whitfield wrote a letter. She wrote it to the Coast Guard, to the state police, to every newspaper in New England. She made 12 copies, and in that letter, she included every entry from her father's logbook, every ship, every date, every name. She worked on the letter for 2 days. She wrote it in the lamp room, where her father wouldn't think to look. She copied the logbook entries by hand, carefully, exactly. She wrote about her mother. "My mother, Margaret Ann Whitfield, discovered my father's crimes in 1954. She threatened to report him. He killed her and made it look like a boating accident." She wrote about the town, about the men who'd helped, about the conspiracy of silence. "I am writing this because no one else will, because the people who should protect us have been bought, because 63 men died, and their families deserve to know the truth, because my mother tried to stop this and was murdered for it." She sealed the letters in envelopes. She addressed them carefully. She used stamps from her father's desk. And then she did something no one expected. She climbed to the top of the lighthouse. She opened the lamp room door. And she turned off the light. At 9:47 p.m., the lighthouse at Cape Sorrow went dark for the first time in 22 years. Ships at sea noticed immediately. Emergency signals went out. The Coast Guard scrambled. And within an hour, 3 patrol boats were heading toward the lighthouse. Margaret sat in the lamp room and waited. Her father found her there. He came up the stairs, shouting her name, demanding to know why the light was off. When he saw her sitting calmly by the darkened lamp, he stopped. "What did you do?" he whispered. "What you should have done a long time ago," Margaret said. "I told the truth." Her father's face went white, then red, then something beyond rage, something cold and empty and final. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "I know exactly what I've done." He took a step toward her, and for a moment, just a moment, Margaret saw her mother's face, pale, terrified. But Margaret didn't move. "They'll come for you," she said. "Tonight. The Coast Guard. The police. Everyone will know." Her father stood there, breathing hard, his fists clenched. Then he turned, and he walked down the stairs. Margaret heard the front door open, close. She heard footsteps on the rocks outside. She went to the window and looked down. Her father was walking toward the cliff edge, toward the place where the rocks met the sea, the place where 14 ships had shattered, where 63 people had drowned. Margaret watched him stop at the edge, watched him look out at the black water. And then, without a word, without a sound, he stepped forward into the dark. Even now, Margaret was still holding on. When the Coast Guard arrived, they found Margaret sitting in the lamp room, the letter in her lap. They found the logbook in her father's office. They found his body on the rocks below. The story broke 3 days later, front page of every newspaper in New England. The lighthouse keeper who murdered for money. The daughter who exposed him. The town that knew and did nothing. 17 men were arrested, including Constable Porter. The lighthouse was decommissioned. And Cape Sorrow became the town that nobody wanted to remember. Margaret left the day after her father's funeral. She took nothing with her but a single photograph, the only one she didn't burn. It was a picture of her mother, standing at the top of the lighthouse, smiling at the camera. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, it said, "Some lights are meant to guide, some are meant to warn. Know which one you are." Daniel Cross found Margaret 3 weeks later in Boston. She was working as a waitress in a diner on Boylston Street. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee. When she brought it to him, he said, "I read about what you did." She didn't look at him. "Then you know what I am." "I know what you did. That's different." She finally met his eyes. "I destroyed everything." "No," Daniel said quietly. "You saved everyone who comes after." Margaret's hands were shaking. 63 people are still dead. And how many more would have died if you'd stayed silent? She didn't have an answer for that. Daniel reached across the counter and took her hand. "You don't have to carry this alone, Margaret." But she pulled away, because she knew the truth. Some weights can't be shared. Some lights burn alone. I never met Margaret Whitfield, but I spoke to Daniel Cross in 1985, 15 years after he last saw her. He told me she'd left Boston without a word. No forwarding address, no goodbye. He spent years trying to find her, but it was like she'd vanished into the fog. In 1992, a package arrived at the Boston Public Library. Inside was Margaret's letter, the original, and a note that said only, "For anyone who needs to know they're not alone." The librarian who opened it tried to trace where it came from. The postmark was smudged. No return address. But there was one detail. One small, strange detail. The envelope smelled like salt water. I'm holding that letter now, and as I read it, I can still feel Margaret's fear in every word, her courage, her loneliness. She wrote, "I don't know if what I did was right. I only know it was necessary. My father taught me that some lights protect and some lights destroy. What he didn't teach me, what I had to learn alone, is that sometimes you have to become the darkness to show others where the light should be. The letter ends with this. If you're reading this, you're probably facing your own impossible choice between loyalty and truth, between love and justice, between staying silent and burning everything down. I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you this. The ships my father destroyed are gone, but the ships I saved by speaking up, they're still sailing. And that has to mean something. It has to. Margaret Whitfield disappeared in 1970. Some say she changed her name and started over. Some say she walked into the ocean, just like her father. Some say she's still out there, somewhere, working in diners and libraries and quiet places, helping people find their way. I don't know which story is true, but I know this. On foggy nights along the coast of Maine, sailors sometimes report seeing a light where the Cape Sorrow Lighthouse used to be. A light that shouldn't exist. A light that guides them safely through the rocks. They call it Margaret's Light. And when the fog clears, the light is always gone. This is Evelyn Brooks. And this is the letter I should have read 30 years ago. Some stories end in silence. Some end in light. Margaret's story ends in both. And maybe that's the only ending that makes sense, because the truth is always dark before it's bright, and the bravest lights are the ones that burn alone. Good night, Margaret, wherever you are. Retry.